So a while back I reviewed the CZ Shadow 2 Compact, and I didn't have very nice things to say about it because it didn't really do the things a carry gun is expected to do, like have a firing pin block or backup iron sights, or a means to decock the hammer without pulling the trigger on the loaded round. It just didn't make sense to me. Fast forward to now, and CZ has released the Shadow 2 Carry, which is what that gun should have been all along, and likely irritates people who went out and bought the Compact because this has the feature set to truly make the Shadow 2 something you could carry. So, eating my words, I went and picked one out to tell you fine people about it. And while we were at it, I decided to compare it to the P09C Nocturn as well as the Sig Sauer P229 Legion and the Staccato C2, because CZ guys always like to talk about how their CZs will outshoot 2011s. So welcome back. If at any point you're finding value in this video, or if you're finding me the right kind of lovable idiot, or just getting a lot of good information, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out. So the other day I was out at Scheels and saw the Shadow 2 Carry in the glass, and I was like, wow, that did everything that I had issues with on the other guns. So I immediately opened up my wallet, took out a $1,500 bill, and paid for the gun. That's how much they sell for at full price. They're kind of expensive. We'll get back to that in the negatives. So I took the Shadow 2 Carry home and I mounted a dot on it immediately, let it cure overnight on the thread locker, then took it to my fancy indoor range to get the gun zeroed. I was immediately impressed with how accurate I was when zeroing the gun. And then I was immediately unimpressed on the second magazine after the gun was zeroed that I had a failed to feed that really kind of took me by surprise. That's one fail to feed. But at that point, it was less than 50 rounds on the gun. I chalked that up to teething issues. Yes, the gun was lubricated prior to going to the range, and just kind of kept going. And then, because I was already a fancy pants at my fancy indoor gun club with my fancy pistol rest, I decided to see the accuracy on the gun. I was shooting Buffalo Creek 115 range loads, who is a supporter of the channel, and I can support you at Buffalo Creek with this. And I got very good accuracy. If you look at where the holes are kind of centered, that is what the gun is capable of. The flyers was me not doing a good job exercising fundamentals. And while I was shooting, I initially was worried that due to the shape of the decocker and how my thumb rests on the decocker, basically, that I would decock the gun in strings of fire. That turned out never to be an issue, so that was awesome. And that was the reason why back in the day I opted for the PO1 Omega convertible, because the decocker was forward swept, so I felt like I would be less likely to decock it. Because I was curious, that gun is about 2x the price, a little bit more than 2x the price of the P09C Nocturn. So I was curious if the gun, performed notably better, and here's a hint, because the law of diminishing returns, no, it didn't, but it is a little bit nicer. So the Shadow 2 Carry is about 3 ounces heavier than the P09C Nocturn, and that 3 ounces makes the gun just a little bit nicer to carry. It's right at about 30.5 ounces unloaded versus about 27.5 ounces unloaded with the weight of the magazine and the optics you see here. The grip on the metal framed CZs is absolutely fantastic. It just feels really, really good in hand. The little lip that they put at the bottom of the grip that makes your pinky kind of pull back into the gun really seats the gun well in your hand. They have great access under the tang and the trigger guard to get your hand really, really high. It just feels super planted in hand in a way that the P09 doesn't quite. It just doesn't feel like I have the gun sinking into my hand and staying put in the same way that the Shadow 2 Carry does. The trigger, similarly, on the Shadow 2 Carry is a notable bit better than the trigger on the P09C Nocturn. The pull weights are just a lot smoother on the double action. The double action's a little bit lighter on the Shadow 2 Carry, and the single action similarly is a little bit lighter as well. And I found that when I was shooting them side by side, doing some rapid fire groups and some slow fire stuff, that I had better control of the Shadow 2 Carry than I did the P09C. It wasn't a ton, but it was a little. What I did notice when I was shooting at the indoor range is I was starting to pull shots. If I did a bad job pulling the trigger, I would pull them high and right, and that is due to the hook shape of the trigger. I am out of practice at shooting CZs fluently, so it's just something I had to manage and change my grip pressures to stabilize that trigger pull. And on the way home, I was thinking, like, I think I like this gun better than my current favorite double action, single action carry gun, which is the SIG Sauer P226 Legion. So later on, when I got to the outdoor gun club, I hollowed out part of the safe and brought those guns with it and got to the business of shooting it. But because it's a carry gun, I initially wanted to see if the gun was going to shoot a wide range of ammunition, including some weird ones, which in this case were the Federal Syntec PCC 130 grains, which have a crazy profile. And I was immediately rewarded with a gun that didn't honestly feel a lot different in recoil, and it was 100% reliable. That choking that it did at the indoor gun club initially never reared its ugly head again. It was just 100% reliable after the second magazine. And again, at the outdoor gun club, I was noticing that my misses on steel were generally high and right, which is not where I usually miss. Usually if I was a right-handed shooter, if I'm missing, it's usually low or left and low, and that was not where I was missing with the CZ. So I've got some work to do on my side to get back to being up to speed on CZ guns. And what I did notice is that the trigger pull on the Shadow 2 carry, the double action is not super smooth. It's kind of hitchy and starty and stagey, and then there's a part where the firing pin block lifts and the trigger just like jumps to the rear. It's like the sudden drop in trigger pull weight before you get to kind of that wall right before the hammer drops. Now, it's not terrible, but it's not the most predictable trigger in the world either. Other double action, single action guns have a notably better double action pull than the CZ does out of the box. The Beretta double action is brilliant. The SIG Sauer double action stroke is pretty much perfectly linear on the P226, 229 guns. So the trigger out of the box isn't the most amazing. The other thing I was noticing is that I couldn't get really amazing trigger speeds with it. And despite the CZ website saying that it has a short reset, I found that not to be the case. It's kind of long, whereas the reset is, now I don't know how long that is, but I do know that the reset is significantly shorter on the 229 Legion. Even still, I was thinking while shooting the gun, I really like how this gun sits in my hand. It's just the right Goldilocks sort of weight. This could potentially unseat my 229. I was at the range filming for this gun. The rain came not once, but twice. So I was running out of time at the range before the next storm blew in because it rained when I left. So I got to the business of comparing the guns at 25 yards, just shooting at 3 pieces of steel, 1 round on each, then 2 rounds on each with only 10 rounds in the magazine. What I found was that the Staccato was the easiest gun to shoot precisely at that distance. The super uniform trigger pull weight and the just character of the sliding straight to the rear trigger makes the precision type shooting just a little bit easier. While the double action guns are very good in their single action triggers, they're not quite the same. So then I moved up to the 15-yard line and did the same drill again. At 15 yards, I had less of an issue with precision. There were no misses. However, the raw time on the Staccato was just a little bit quicker. So did the Shadow 2 outshoot the Staccato in my hands? No, but I am a fluent 2011 shooter. It's the platform I compete with, but it is very, very close. And I imagine with practice, the gap could be non-existent. Liking what I was seeing from this gun, I decided to order a fancy holster for it and actually start carrying the darn thing. I really like how the gun shoots. I like the fact it's got the decockers. I like the backup iron sights. I like just about everything about the gun. Now, some of you are going to say, well, you said the Shadow 2 Compact was just a kind of updated P01, and the Shadow 2 Carry is as well. That's not different about the gun, but while it is just an updated version of the gun, all the updates are improvements in my opinion. The slide stop, if you look at the old P01 slide stops, the ledge is actually built up on the bottom of the slide stop, which makes it impossible to hit with your strong hand thumb. You generally drop the slide with your support hand thumb. But on the Shadow 2 Carry, the ledge is at the top, so you can go around the decocker and reach it. So if I lock the slide to the rear, I can drop the slide with my strong hand thumb, which is a welcome feature and an added capability that's not on the legacy gun. The slide serrations are the Shadow 2 slide serrations, which are much better than the old P01 serrations, which honestly, It's not just the serrations that have changed. If you look at the slide thickness, the slide is narrower than the frame on the P01, whereas the slide is basically flush with the frame on the Shadow 2. So manipulating the muzzle of the gun is a little bit better on the Shadow 2 compact carry guns than it is on the P01. The other thing that changed is if you look at the front sights on the old P01s is retained by the pin that holds the bushing and the slide, whereas on the Shadow 2 carry, it is a dovetailed sight and it still has the roll pin, but all the roll pin is doing is retaining the bushing. The front and back straps of the gun has much better traction on the Shadow 2 frames than it does on the P01 frames. Now throw in the fact that you still keep your firing pin block, you have direct mount optics and a co-witness dovetail rear sight, and the guns are pretty solid. Does it shoot much nicer than a P01? No. Is the trigger much nicer than the P01? Not really. In fact, the trigger on this P01, which has been shot a bunch, is much nicer than the trigger on the Shadow 2 carry, which has only got, I don't know, somewhere between 500 and 700 rounds on it so far. So if you've got a P01, should you run out and upgrade it? Probably not if you're happy with your P01, but if you're a dot shooter and you don't want to send your P01 out to a gunsmith to get a dot on your P01, then it kind of makes sense, although you're going to pay for it because it's expensive. So let's talk about the negatives on the pistol. The first negative on this pistol is going to be the cost. Now, they say the full price for this pistol, which is what I paid, is $14.99. You can find them online for about $12.99 if you shop around. And the gun isn't a evolution of the P01, it's basically just a revision of the P01. And they're charging a lot more money for a revision. P01s are selling between about $700 and $800 right now. And if you think about all the changes we talked about, the checkering on the front and back strap is going to take more machine time, as is the additional slots on the rail. That's likely going to be, let's call that a $200 premium. I think that's wildly overstated, but there it is. The barrel on the Shadow 2 Compact is a bull barrel, and they're using a thicker guide rod on it. Let's say that's a premium of about $100. An optic sight cut, as you see here, let's say that that's another premium of about $100 when it's machined into the slide in the first place. And then you've got these fancy pants aluminum grips that they put on the gun that honestly nobody likes. And if you don't like your fancy pants Shadow 2 grips, check out LOK Grips. This can help you there. Since these grips sell for like 110 bucks on the internet, if you were to try and go and find them, they're very expensive. So let's give it like an $80 premium. Now we've just talked about like a $480 premium if you build from kind of the $700 price point, which is kind of the discount price point for a P01. You're at just under $1,200. If you go from full price to full price, you're taking an $800 gun and you're stopping at $1,280, which is still over $200 less than what the ask price is. I think that CZ is using that Shadow 2 name and charging a premium for it that I feel like is overstated for what the value of the design revisions are. And similarly, if you were in a gun store and you saw the Shadow 2 carry and a P229 Legion, without shooting the guns side by side to understand how they shoot differently, the SIG 229 just blows it away in hand. It feels like a more expensive gun. It's got better grips. It has a way better trigger in both double action and single action. The reset's way shorter, and it comes with tritium night sights, whereas the sights on the Shadow 2 are the same as they are on the P09C Nocturn, which is the photoluminescent steel sights. They're okay as far as the sight picture is concerned, but they're kind of garbage as it comes to night sights. The price point they're positioning this gun at, it should have tritium night sights, like it should. Or it should just abandon those altogether and just put fibers on it. That's what Staccato does with $2,500 pistols. A negative for me is just the hooked trigger. I was missing shots high and right with the trigger. I can figure that out. That's a software problem, not a hardware problem, but I'll have to figure out how to pull the trigger at speed correctly. Then there's going to be the snarls of the 75 BD platform that this gun is based on. The firing pin retaining pin means that this gun is not dry fire immune. You have to use snap caps when dry firing this gun. And then if you've shot a lot of CZs to high round counts, you know that you have to stay on top of the service life of your slide stop and trigger return spring. And then there's the issue with the grips. The aluminum Shadow 2 grips look pretty, and that's about all they do well. Everybody is probably going to swap the grips immediately to some LOK grips. I have some on order. they're not here yet. And it's not like you can't get away with good grips at the price point. As I mentioned, the wraparound grips on the 229 are fantastic. Like, there's no sense at all at changing them because they are the Goldilocks level of grippiness to comfort when you're carrying them, and they feel good in hand. So they're functional, look nice, and perform well. But all those negatives aside, I really do like how the gun shoots. It is super controllable. It is the right weight with the right grips. It will stay even more planted. It is laser beam accurate. Like, I felt like I just had a telepathic laser when I was shooting and I was on with the gun. CZ makes incredibly accurate pistols that are very soft to shoot. It is incredibly easy to understand why so many people are enamored with the brand in the CZ75 guns. The Shadow 2 carry is awesome. I'm going to be shooting this more and carrying the gun and learning more about it, so check in for more content later on. If you want to watch a video why I think CZs are terrible, yes, that is a clickbait title, you can watch this here, but it just talks about the shortcomings of the platform. CZs are great, honestly.